Good morning. Okay, well, this guy was on my plane, and I remembered you because you had this cool bow tie, and yet again today. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
My 6 kids make more noise than you. What's up with that? First of all, let me just say what a privilege it is. As Joe mentioned, he said a lot of things, and I do believe in payback and karma. People keep talking about his shoes. I'm just glad he's dressed. He shared the positive, mission-oriented side of Social Venture Network. He didn't share the social side. But I truly am honored to be here. I truly want to thank Leon. God bless him, because, yes. He would say, I emailed you, did you get it? I emailed you, did you get it? I'm thinking it must be in your spam, but I know you're going to respond to me by close of business today. So I apologize, but now you know I got 6 kids. I had a reason, but thank you very much. I do want to thank Mary particularly for trusting Joe to invite me. And I want to thank Joe for inviting me. I used to do this a lot. I don't get to do it a lot anymore because having 6 kids, and particularly the 7-year-olds, every time I leave, it's like a natural disaster. Like, oh my God, don't go. I'm like, no, a peaceful mommy is a better mommy. And I emailed Leon. He said, you're going back early, because I thought about going back today. And I said, no, because if I can get some sun, because I don't know if you've seen the weather in D.C., but flash floods, not cute. If I could play some golf, then I'll go back peaceful, and I'll actually care that your teddy's falling apart or the head fell off, or you have this massive science project due within 24 hours. I'll be a better person. So I want to talk to you today. There are many great speakers lined up. I was actually privileged and humbled to know that I've actually had the chance to work with some of them. And so I realized when I looked at the agenda this morning that I have the opportunity to just kind of lay the context. I also have a tendency to change things. So I'm definitely going to change what I'm going to say, because now I have a chance to get to know who's in the room and realize that many of you reflect some of the things that I want to talk about. But in order for me to do this, I want to get to know who's in the room. So raise your hand if you are part of the not-for-profit sector. Woo, all right now. God bless all of you. And that vow of poverty you've taken. I'm just kidding. Raise your hand if you're in the private sector. Okay? Raise your hand if your organization is less than 5 people. 5 or less. Okay. Raise your hand if your organization is between 5 to 20 people. Okay? And raise your hand if you're 21 plus. Wow. Okay. Raise your hand if your budget is less than $1 million or less. Okay. Raise your hand if it's more than between $1 million and $5 million. And then if you're over 5. All right, get to know those people. They talk about this trickle down. Let it trickle on down. Trickle on down. Okay, I'm talking about. So there's a quote here. What I want to talk about is kind of innovation, but one of the things that I want to be mindful of is that I think it's a term that's often overused. As Joe mentioned, I have the privilege to teach at Georgetown University as well as American University. I went to Georgetown undergrad and I went to AU grad. Did somebody say yes? Are there Hoyas in the house? Oh, yes! Stand up. Be proud. Stand up. That's what I'm talking about. All right. There's always one somewhere. There's always one. And so I teach this class to innovation to MBA graduate students and Masters of the School of Foreign Service students. And they oftentimes walk in and think it's a very academic experience. They think that they're going to sit down or they're going to put on their lab coats and it's going to be this research and development experience. They truly know they're not going to have any money whatsoever, but they just think that they're going to solve something right away. And one of the things that I have come to learn is that innovation is not about just solving something, right? And I think that for me, as somebody who's been in the social sector for a long time, I really began to appreciate innovation, because when I started in this work, I thought that my job was to make a difference. But I realized in the end, what I need to do is figure out how to make change. And I say that distinctly because I am the product of many of the programs that some of you run. I grew up in a single-parent household. My mom worked as a comptroller during the week and cleaned houses on the weekend. I had the privilege to go to public school until 3rd grade, when my classmate threw a rock at the teacher and she died instantly in the classroom. From that moving forward, I went to Catholic school. I don't know. The nuns, the rulers, it's true. It's true. And then I went on to this hoity-toity prep school. And I say all that to say that that really shaped who I was. Because when I rolled up in the hoity-toity private school, I will not share the name because some of you may be fellow alums, I had a wonderful experience, don't get me wrong. But I rolled up in the short bus, picked up from the apartment buildings, driving through the gated communities to show up at a private school. People were driving Mercedes and Jaguars and Bentleys. I didn't even know what a Bentley was, right? Because I was born before Jay-Z, so it wasn't popular at that time. And I said, oh my God, what am I missing? I'm in Orange, one-bedroom apartment with my mom. They're in gated communities in Montclair and South Orange and Maplewood. Some of you may know it. I see people going, oh, I know that school. And what I realized was, I was like, oh my God, I must be doing something wrong. Why don't I have that? And then I would sit in class with them and I go, woo, if they would stop smoking pot, they could answer a question. And I realized at that moment in time that the only difference between me and them was race and class. That they had parents, they had two parents. Sometimes they spent more time with the nanny. I had a single parent. I was black, they were white, many of them. I clearly was poor. We had food stamps. We would stand in line. I would see a classmate behind me. I was like, Mom, please don't pull them out right now. She's like, well, if I don't pull them out, we don't eat. And I would duck, literally, under the counter. And I realized then that the challenge of saying, well, you're not too smart, you're not bright, you're not tall enough, those were just surface issues that people were trying to solve for. I would go to the local Y, and they would try to solve those things that were easily and readily apparent. But what they were not solving for was systemic failures of race and class, particularly in this country. And Joe will tell you, I'm somebody, I don't like poverty. Poverty is not cute. And so I'm a capitalist all the way. So I was challenged from the beginning to figure out how could I, as a black girl, not little anymore, but a little black girl from New York and New Jersey, exposed to public school and then private school, to recognize the huge disparity between myself and those around me. What was going to make that difference so no one else had to travel that road? I realized early on that it was not going to be good enough for me to just say, well, let me fix it for myself and my friends. But how could I make sure that no one else travels that journey? I share that because to me, that's the difference. When we think about the tremendous challenges facing our society, many of you already know this, but we no longer have the luxury when 1 in 20 people are going to be picked up to go potentially to jail every single day. It's 1 in 3 if you are a person of color. It's 1 in 2 if you are an African American male. Those are my sons. I realize that we can no longer play with people's lives, beg for money under the virtue and guise of I'm going to help other people unless we create a systemic change so that people could indeed help themselves. I realized early on that my job as a social sector leader was not to solve problems but to make change and ultimately put myself out of business. I remember being asked to join the board of a homeless shelter, and I remember on the second meeting they said, so, you any questions? I go, yeah, I came to the first meeting. I listened, I paid attention. I'm not really clear why our mission is not to solve homelessness. I'm not really clear why our mission is to build more shelters. And they looked at me and they said, who let you in? And I said, well, there was this ad in the paper. I showed up. You liked me. It was clear I checked the diversity box. Now you know diversity is not always welcome. Just saying. So I say all that to say that for me, this concept of innovation is not new, right? But what is happening is that it's getting market penetration, that people are starting to talk about it. And so one of the things that I challenge is that this cannot just be something that is relegated to Steve Jobs, because I still don't know why I bought the iPod, but I can't live without it now. This is not something that is relegated to products, although I love those red bands that you gave us with the jump drives. That is cool. It's not relegated to just things that we can buy. But innovation now has to seep into our DNA, and it needs to be about systems, about processes, about legislation, and all that we keep talking about. And so oftentimes I find that people say, well, innovation, that's for somebody else. And all I want to say is that's not true. I picked this up. Do people know what bricolage is? What is it, Mary? Right. So it's an organization that actually sells arts and crafts on behalf of not-for-profits. But the term is actually a French term that means you take materials from wherever you can get them and reuse them despite their original purpose. Now, I had an Auntie Mary. Everybody has Auntie Mary. It's that crazy aunt that would come visit you, and your mom would say, don't say anything. Just listen. And she would always come with things that looked like this. I didn't know that she actually picked them out the trash. Come to find out, she was very wealthy. She was just eccentric. But the idea that we have the resources amongst us, so it is not for the lack of the resources, it is for the lack of our creativity. It is for the lack of our ability to think. And so when I think about innovation, it is not just an outcome, but it is a process. It is the means by which we are able to think differently, to balance creativity and not be drowned in reality. It is the opportunity to think beyond ourselves. And many of you know, or may know, that design thinking is like one of the newest, hottest courses, or online. Everybody takes a design. Anybody taking a design thinking course? Okay, good, because I don't want to offend anybody. But it's this concept where there is something valuable of having an interdisciplinary approach to solve social problems. And so what I like about this design thinking concept is that it forces us to ask 4 questions that, having run a not-for-profit several times over, realize we oftentimes don't have time to ask the right questions. And so design thinking is a way to start that innovation process within yourself. The first question is, what is? And let me tell you, as a mother of 6, it's oftentimes the hardest question for people to answer. Because we want to tell you what we think it is, but not what it really is. It is that difference of saying, well, you know, only the smart kids go to private school. No, there were some racial issues about going to private school. There were some real economic gaps about going to private school. So the what is question is really a reality check, a mirror check of what is really going on right now. People not being able to get jobs, well, that's part of the problem. But when more than 40% of the population of some states has been incarcerated, the problem is not them getting jobs. The problem is they've been incarcerated. Then you keep going. Why'd they get incarcerated? Well, because sometimes we have laws like 3 strikes you're out that only apply to certain communities. And you keep going. So the what is not just what is in front of you, but what is the systemic trajectory of how you got where you are. Because if you don't know where you really are, you really can't fix stuff. That's the difference between a Band-Aid approach and actually systemic change. The second question is, what if? This actually gets to be the fun part. Okay. What do you wish there was? My wife is actually doing this consulting for I don't even know what it's called. It's some group. You can tell I'm slightly biased. But it's a group that does the gardens in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And I was like, well, that's cute. And I went and by the gardens, and I was like, well, you know, because you take this stuff for granted. Being in D.C., like the cherry blossoms, yeah, they're there. All I know is it causes traffic, lots of tourists. They hold up the subway, they take our spots. But these folks were so passionate about what they wanted to do, because what they realized was they had the privilege to be in Georgetown. How do you expand that physical beauty beyond that one location? So as I sat there and listened, I was like, wow, because they had a powerful what is. They were like, what if every single community in Washington, D.C., the outer beauty could reflect the inner potential of every single person? I was like, well, you go ahead, plant people, y'all go. And so the what if is a real question. It is a chance for us to think about what if, but not just what if next month, like what if I get that grant from Mary? Hint, hint. Or what if I get that press coverage from Joe? Right? But it's what if this world was truly different? And then the third question is what wows? And not like what wows, like Richard's shoes, that wows. Those are cool. Or the bow tie, that's cool, right? My pocket square. But what wows is what resonates. What sits well with everyone around the table? What wows is the means by which you begin to prioritize all those crazy dreams that you have to what actually could be possible. The key there is that what wows is not just what you believe, but what the other stakeholders believe. And the idea then is not just to ponder in that for like months and months and months at a time. Like I know as having been an executive recently, they go, man, what if? And then we go, and it's like that parking lot that we never go revisit, right? What wows is actually thinking about, of the 20 things of the what ifs, what are the 3 things that I can test to get there? And the final thing is what works? And do it. I used to think that the Nike phrase, just do it, was completely overrated. But I realized that there's such a simplicity and power within those 3 words that oftentimes it's paralyzing, because we are oftentimes our greatest barrier to the greatness that we can become. So I share this to hopefully depict the fact that innovation is not just for CEOs and fancy schmancy people in white coats with millions of dollars, but it is indeed my Auntie Marion of walking around with the shopping cart she probably stole from ShopRite or Safeway, picking up stuff from around and figuring out what can I do with the resources I have. The what if is not about the lack of, the what if is the potential. The what is not what I think, the what is validated by the community by which I'm trying to serve. I say all that because I am big on, as Joe knows, I'm going to skip those because you are the examples. But as Joe knows, one of the things that I am big on is competency, particularly cultural competency. One of the most important things about innovation, we have all the breaks from previous practice, et cetera, but is that really making sure that it is grounded in not what you believe as an individual, but what the community needs. And therefore, it's not something you can rush. It's not going to meet an annual report deadline. It's not going to meet a grant report deadline. It's going to meet the deadline of what the community can do. And I'll give an example. When I graduated from Georgetown, I worked in corporate America for a year. And I was like, ooh, I got picked. I was going to be in this great leadership program. And I got the job because one of the women who runs the VP, was the VP of Human Resources, was a Hoya. She was like, oh, I want a Hoya, come on in. And then I got it, and I was like, oh, this is great. And when I graduated in 1989, don't tell anybody, I thought that making $70,000 was a lot. I was like, woo, I'm going to take over. And all I knew was that when you finish the program, you got bumped up to 100. What I didn't realize is how hard it was to finish the program. Because I got through, and I was like, I booked $19 billion in sales for this company. I said, okay, I'm ready. And they said, well, here's the deal. You don't really progress until somebody dies or leaves the company. And I said, what the hell? That was not in the fine print. That's not in my contract. That's not what it says. And I realized then that corporate America, for many reasons, was not for me. But I also realized that it is indeed the false confines and structures that limit what our potential is. That it was not about me finding the right job to recognize my potential, but determining what my potential was and reverse engineering what were the best outlets to do that. And so when I then left, and I went on to start my own company, and then I ended up selling that, I realized that this was my chance to do something different. And so I said, being the capitalist I am, well, let me go teach some young inner city kids about entrepreneurship, because that's cool. And I would show up, and they'd look at me, and they go, what you going to teach us? How much money do you make? I make more than that right now. How long is this going to take me? How long is this program? Oh, I ain't got time for that. I got to go get my kids. I got to get my little brothers and little sisters. And what happened was I thought that I was going to make a difference by bringing what I thought was greatness to the table. What I quickly realized is that, one, I was not going to solve this problem overnight, that it was going to be gradual, that I needed to make sure that it had the potential to better their lives, but not make me feel better. And that's huge, because I run into people all the time who talk about all the great things they do, and I'm going, so who are you really helping? Well, I feel good. Well, that's fabulous, and you look great. But are you really making change? And I say that because I feel like we are at a point, and maybe because now I have 6 kids, ages 7 to 23, that we can no longer wait. When you talk about the problems that they have now gone on for 50 to 100 years. When are we really going to make change? When the flash floods came, and then a couple years ago we had an earthquake in D.C., I was like, Mother Nature's telling us it's time to make a change. We are now down to single digits, 1 in a single digit, for the chance of someone to not eat tonight, to be imprisoned, to get AIDS, to be sexually assaulted. I don't know about you, but this is not what I signed up for when I thought this was what humankind had to offer. And so for me, innovation is not just the trendy, techie thing that we do, but it really is about a systemic approach to solving problems. So what does that take? It means you got to take risks, and I know many of you already know this. You got to be willing to collaborate. Most important, you got to be willing to fail and admit it. The greatest challenge in the social sector is we do not ever want to admit we've made a mistake. In our household, we say, we love making mistakes because that's the only way that you learn. And unless we start to tell the stories of our mistakes, we run the risk of wasting time we do not have because everybody else is going to do what we already did. And we just don't have time for that anymore. I'll give a couple of examples in terms of what I've come to think about innovation. When you think about seek public-private partnerships, how many people have heard of First Book? Okay, a few folks. So First Book, I'm proud to say, was founded by a friend of mine named Kyle Zimmer. And at first she started to think about, well, wow, kids in urban areas, they can't read. They don't have books. She'd walk into the library. She's like, where's the library? I go, see those 5 books right there? That's it. Well, where'd the rest of them go? They're holding up somebody's table. They're keeping a window open in the classroom because there's no air conditioning, but they're not here. And she goes, well, let me get people to donate books. Well, you know what that's like, going to 100 people trying to get like 50 books. It's just not scalable. It doesn't make sense. And so she realized, if I got all the schools to work together in a community, and then I got all the communities across the country to work together, I'd probably have more purchasing power than a month of online sales at Barnes & Noble. And so she created the First Book marketplace where any teacher can go and get books 50 to 90% off. Because if they sign on, she has the numbers and the purchasing power to bring those prices down. She also created a book bank where we all know you get a book, you pass it on now. Maybe you don't even, anybody buy books anymore? Okay, a few people. Get an iPad. No, I'm just kidding. But they have all these extra books. And so what do they do with them? So they donate them to the bank. They get their charitable contribution, and a wealth of opportunities opened up to kids all across the country. Now, that took years. It was a gradual process that took years. But now, in most communities, you will go into a school, and there will be a First Book there. You may not know it, but it's there because of First Book. Now, that's pretty dramatic, a multi-million-dollar approach. So let me give you something a little bit smaller. Joe mentioned that we actually connected because I was doing work around reentry. I had the privilege to be a Soros Fellow. And so I decided that, again, being the capitalist that I am, there had to be a market-based approach to be able to solve what was happening in our communities. Recognizing the majority of criminal justice funding goes to locking people up, with very little going toward reentry. And the time of the budget crisis in the late 90s and early 2000s, lifers were actually going home in the state of North Carolina because they could not afford to keep them anymore. And I said, well, besides creating community panic, what are we going to do differently? They're going home and they're coming right back. It's like a revolving door. Recidivism rate's 80 to 90%. I said, what is really the problem here? Is it because they got lost? Is it because their families are bad? Is it because they're not supportive? And you know what we found out? We found out that over 72%, like 72.5%, of the recidivism reasons in North Carolina were due to technical violations. So what that means is I walk out the prison, woohoo, I'm free. I'm waiting for the bus because there's no Uber coming to get me. Y'all must not know Uber because that is the bomb. That's an innovation. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I digress. So you walk out the prison, there's no bus. You get a bus pass. There's no van service like we got today, thanks to Office Depot Foundation. You get a pass. And you may have to walk a mile or two to the bus. You wait for the bus. You go into town. You probably have the same clothes on you had 10 years ago. They might not fit. They might be too small, they might be too big, but you're probably not looking like you blended in with the downtown community. So, you know, the kind officer comes up and says, so, sir, can I help you? Ma'am, can I help you? You look a little out of place. And you go, no, I'm just trying to get home. Oh, well, where's home? And you give the last address you knew. Do you have any ID? No, I don't have any ID. Well, you know, in this state, you're considered a vagabond if you don't have an ID. So we're going to take you on down to the jail. You could be rearrested in a matter of hours. Or better yet, you get past that. You get somebody to come pick you up, and you get home. Okay, and then you go, wow, and you're looking at your appointment book because you don't have a Mac, you don't have an iPhone. And you're going, okay, I got to get to my parole officer Monday at 9. And they're on the south side. Oh, wait, I have my drug test at 10:30. That's on the east side. The bus system doesn't really go that way. So how am I going to make it across? Nobody in my family has a car. So how am I going to do? Okay, well, I'm going to try. I'm going to trust. I'm going to pray. So you go and you make it. All right, 8:57. I'm sitting there. I'm good. Oh, wait a minute. It's like a doctor's appointment. The parole officer's not ready to see me. Now it's 9:45. Now it's 10 o'clock. Now it's 10:15. I am never going to make it. I don't have a job. I missed my appointment. I've now broken my parole. I'm on my way back to prison. And so I said, well, how come people don't know this? And they said, well, because nobody talks to each other. I said, okay, so when Glenn or Bob or Susie or Buffy gets out of prison, I did that on purpose. When they get out of prison, you don't really know what. No. We just know that they get booked as soon as possible by the probation officer. They get booked as soon as possible for mental health, whatever, no coordination. So I said, this cannot be rocket science. So we raised $100,000 to create a database system and an online system that would track everyone for 6 months coming out of one facility. And it would be an open source code that people could see. Buffy has to be here. Again, I shouldn't book her. We watched within a year's time frame at one facility where the residents were cut across 4 communities. We reduced recidivism by 55%. Now the sad part is that's innovation where we are. It should not have been that hard. But with $100,000, we saved the state millions of dollars. If everybody thought that way, and we didn't relegate it to the lab coats and the R&D and the multi-million-dollar budgets, imagine the difference we can make. And then we turned the system over to the Department of Corrections in North Carolina, and they're still using it. The beauty of what innovation has to offer is that it is not about changing the world instantly, but it's about the incremental change that ultimately leads to systemic change. It is the little points of making a difference that lead to the sum of real change. That's what we're in this for. And I realize that I'm preaching to the choir, but I do that because I think one of the greatest disservices we do to ourselves as those of the social sector is we keep hitting our head up against the wall and saying, I know it's going to get better tomorrow. I know it's going to get better with some more money. I know it's going to get better with some more volunteers. But the reality is that with innovation, the opportunity to be creative, level set against the reality that we have and the reality we desire, truly creates systems change. What we did wasn't anything special. It was just something better than what existed before. What First Book is doing, Kyle Zimmer tell you, she's not a genius, although she may very well get the MacArthur Genius Award one day, but she indeed was doing something better. And so one of the things that we talk about, or I have the pleasure now to think about, is what are opportunities for innovation? And one thing that I realized I didn't point to in a bullet is that this has to be not just about us, but about the folks that we're trying to serve, right? And I hate to say serve, but really be in partnership with, right? This crazy hierarchical dynamic that we have within societies and communities about who am I, that I have the ability to create change and you will receive it. It has to be collaborative in nature, and not just from an institutional perspective of public and private, but how do you engage the voices of those who are there? One of the greatest challenges we have is the lack of inclusion of indigenous leadership and innovation in the work that we do. And so therefore, the focus on prosperity, not just for the organization, but for the individual and the community, is paramount. As Joe mentioned, I used to run a venture capital firm, and we only invested in women and people of color. Now, we did that because they didn't have any venture capital. When I tried to start my company, and I went to somebody, first of all, I went to the Small Business Administration. They've gotten better now, so don't hold this against them. But I went there and I said, hey, I want a loan. I got a great business plan. I got a finance degree from Georgetown. I know this stuff inside out. I've taken my entrepreneurship classes. I've run a business while I was on campus. I'm ready. And they said, well, you don't have good credit. I was like, no shit, Sherlock. I was like, I, like every other idiot, regardless of race, gender, or class, walked across the quad and said, oh, I can get a credit card. Let me do that. We didn't like the food. Well, Marriott. We didn't like the food, so we'd eat at the cafeteria, because that's what our student financial aid paid for. And then we go to Georgetown and be like, yeah, I'm at Georgetown. I'm having dinner. And then it was like, oh, wait, I got to repay the credit card. Wow, so if I take that work-study check, it doesn't seem, of course I don't have good credit, because nobody taught me that in my finance degree. Well, you have a lot of debt. Of course I do. Did you miss the part where I was a single parent? I was the first person in my household to go to college. That $60,000 price tag, it didn't really resonate with me. I just wanted to go because I knew it was a means to an end. I'm going to pay it back. I got a grace period, 6 months. It's not up yet. And then I'm going to start paying my student loans back. Little did I know I'm still paying. Soon I'll be paying for my kids' student loans. But they were like, no, you can't get a loan. I was like, oh, my God, really? I thought this is what you were supposed to do. And then I said, okay, well, let me get venture capital because they're more risk takers. Whoa, if I could have gotten past the front door, that would have been great. People thought I was the help. They thought I was somebody's daughter's friend. And I was like, okay, this is just crazy. And so I realized that out of my experience, I probably was not the only person having that experience. And so I went around and talked to people. And they said, yeah, we can't get access to capital. And I said, well, why is that? And I said, well, forget why is it. How do we make that change? And I realized that I can make a difference and create some money, get some money and make investments, but how do I make change? And so we ended up creating a venture capital firm that would invest in early stage businesses. Many of them, I realize this is the world of Britain, would probably just come out of Office Depot from getting their copies and bring them to us, hot off the copy machine. No PowerPoints, no sending me emails back then. And we'd read them and we'd say, okay, what do you need? And we would give them financial capital and human capital. And we would stay in the business all the way through so that the owners did not get diluted. And then when a liquidity event happened, we then gave them all of the wealth that was earned. And the reality was that this was not going to be about our prosperity, but about their prosperity. That the only way to make systemic change was to make sure that they were prosperous, and therefore their family could be prosperous, and therefore their communities could be prosperous. And that was huge to be able to make that jump. And so I say that to say because now in terms of human capital, social capital, intellectual capital, financial capital, there are tons of opportunities for innovation. As Joe mentioned, which didn't make the bio, but of course when they put makeup on the back, that's what happened to my face. The whole picture changed because they put that powder on. Otherwise, I look like that. The idea that now I'm privileged to be a political appointee. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at the Corporation for National Community Service, AmeriCorps. And I'm also the lead for our My Brother's Keeper initiative and leading the mentoring efforts as part of the opportunity to change the lives of boys and young men of color in this country. As I was coming up, I realized that I never realized the power of volunteers. That when I started my first nonprofit, I was in grad school. So I just grabbed everybody who was in my class and I just said, hey, do this, do this, do this. But the real opportunity to harness human capital, to take things to scale. One of the things that Mary touched upon is the opportunity to take things to scale. That's the real value of innovation, of not just creating something for yourselves and then for the community and for your clients or your partners, but then how do you replicate that beyond? One way to scale is through volunteers. Whether I used to grab all my family members and friends, or you leverage national service programs, you reach out to places like Points of Light that have tons of opportunities for you to volunteer. You reach out to the Chamber of Commerce. They'll help you do that as well. But the recognition here is that everything does not require dollars, right? Everything does not require financial resources. There is a real role for people. And as a finance person, that took me a long time because I thought everything was derivatives and commodities and equities, right? But the reality is really about people and their heart and their commitment and their personal mission and their desires and their dreams and their hopes. Then there's this new thing called social finance, right? The opportunity to do things differently with money. We have the Social Innovation Fund of the Corporation for National Community Service. The Department of Treasury is about to announce a Treasury Innovation Fund, $6 million to support financial literacy at low-income communities over the next couple of months. Tons of things around the word innovation. Now, for government, that's a big deal. Just starting to do things differently. Now, forget better, just differently is a start. But the recognition that the people, the folks on the ground probably know what to do better with the taxpayer dollars than we do is a huge, innovative, thought-provoking process that has really transformed the government, particularly over the past 7 or 8 years. And so you have this concept of how do I use information? How do I use evidence-based research? How do I not just go with my gut and my intuition, which is not always wrong, but how do I validate that to make sure that I'm making the investment in the right things? How do I use evidence-based research, performance measures, cost per outcome to really determine that what I'm doing is going to make a difference? And that may seem onerous, but you've taken on the job to manage people's lives. That cannot be done on the cheap, on the fly, or on the down low. And I will say that really was amplified for me when I became a parent. Because every day when I wake up and I look at them, they're looking back at me and say, so what are you going to do for me today? It is the most humbling experience ever because they didn't decide to come to me. Some days they probably wish they went somewhere else. But they're here and they're saying, what are you going to do? Every day, too often, nobody in this room, but too often, leaders in the community say, I'm here to help you. And then people trust you. And then you let them down. Because foundations, press, moving the needle, 5%, 10%, that's great. But in places like Southeast DC, Compton, I don't know what bad parts are in Boca. Probably none. I don't know. Maybe somebody could tell me. I know there's places in Orlando and Miami. New York, 5 to 10% don't mean jack. The level of subjectivity that we have allowed to penetrate our sector at the cost of people's lives and their well-being is a sad statement. It is a bad reflection. So the opportunity to shift that and make a difference by having real performance measures and outcome, not just outputs, because we all got great reports, we all got well-branded materials, but what are the outcomes that we really want to focus on? And then the final thing I would say is collaboration, and I know it's overused, but I think that it really has the potential. And we used to collaborate all the time. When I was running my not-for-profit that taught kids entrepreneurship, we started in DC, and we were in one school, and here I was, people looking like, what are you going to do for me? We ended up having a real difference. We focused on the training, we focused on incubation, and we focused on investment. We did not just serve the child, we served the teacher and their parents and all of their siblings. We realized the interdependency and the complexity of the social problems that we were trying to solve did not reside in the classroom. They did not resolve just in the court system. They did not just resolve in public housing, but they were completely connected. And so we served everybody. We would go in, and this was before Nifty started, so I love what Steve is doing now, but we would go in to every place but schools. And we would say, what do you need to know? And we created a modular curriculum that could be moved around based on what skills the students had at the time. We would engage the teachers and the parents. They had to show up. And then we would make real investments in these young people. And what we realized over time is that we would run the program the first year. We would then run the program in partnership the second year. And the third year, it was their program. All the money that we had raised the first year, we ran the program and paid everybody in the program. The second year, we took half, they took half. The third year, we gave it all to them. Because what was innovative at the time was that we did not want to be the professionalized social service for the rest of our lives in these communities. We wanted to be able to transfer the intellectual property and, more importantly, the financial capital to those communities. By partnering with other agencies and transitioning and transferring all that we had, we went from one location in DC to 20 locations. We went from just being in DC to 16 sites in the US and 3 international sites. And we know numbers are a big deal, but we went from raising $250,000 for our program to leveraging over $10 million across the country. All because it was not about ego. It was about outcomes. Those programs are still running. The national office has closed intentionally. Because if we did our job, we were then helping to change the paradigm of those who were trickling down the money, that it was not about a pedigreed, academically criteriaed Georgetown student who could save the day, but it was those folks in the community who had the solutions all along. When we cashed out of the venture capital fund, it wasn't about us taking our money and going, it was nice to get our money back. But we took all the excess, all the profits we made, and put it in other venture capital firms and forced them to shift their paradigm, move past the research that says ethnic-oriented VCs invest in the same ethnicity as they are. And we said, no, we've got data that says women and people of color can be just as successful, and here's the criteria. Here are the inputs, here are the outputs, and more importantly, here are the outcomes. I don't know if people are investors in here, but when we cashed out, we had earned over 18.75% ROI on our investment. I don't know a VC firm that had made that so far. Now, I'm not going to lie, it wasn't easy. Our internal costs were probably much higher than most, but that didn't matter because it was that investment of human capital and financial capital that made a difference. It was not having a 5-year trajectory, but was having a 10 to 12-year trajectory that made all the difference. The issue of being patient, we made a lot of mistakes. We kicked people out. We did all kinds of stuff wrong. But being able to own those, being able to report on those, that made the difference. And so when we talk about innovation, what I say is that it's not something relegated to a select few that are highly talented or highly capitalized. It is the opportunity that we all have to bring in creativity, aspirations, and dreams and see them realized. The things that oftentimes we tell you and I see happening to our girls at 7 and 8, let that stuff go. Welcome to the real world. I remember growing up, my mom was like, yeah, that's cute, let it go, welcome to the real world. Well, the problem is we're settling. The real world could be our dreams. It could very well be all that we want it to be. And so when I think about, excuse me, all the opportunities that we have, I do want to go to resources. I want to be clear that there'll be newfangled techniques like social finance that will come out there, but what are the resources that we need to be successful? Well, one is that you need your board of directors. How many people here are donors? How many people are on boards? How many people are on staff? How many people just live in the communities? Those are all the stakeholders, right? So the first resource needed is everybody. Oftentimes we watch the cult of personality take over, and the MacArthur Genius Award goes to one person. But you always hear them say, let me thank everybody else that got me here, right? The cult of the presidency or whatever. It's not just one person, it's a whole event. So the first thing that's not on here is resources. Leverage every single stakeholder that you have. The second thing is use your colleges and universities. Being a professor, we're free. Free. I run something at Georgetown called the Social Venture Lab. Every year, we have 30 students that free of charge go in to solve social problems for anybody that wants it. We have something called the Hoya Clinic where medical students actually come and during their second year prior to their rotations, they figure out how they can help work with people in DC. They have a $100,000 government contract that essentially says, if you can focus on prevention, we can save money in the emergency room. Because I know you all don't know, but whether there's Affordable Care Act or not, most people are still getting their primary care through the emergency door. And so the city said, well, how do we fix that? And they were doing great work, so they thought. But when the government finally said, so how many people have you served? They were like, oh, wait, I can get that for you. And they literally counted all their charts. And they were like, okay, that's great. How many people now have not gone to the emergency room? I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. Nobody knew. And so we went in and said, well, how do we determine that? And the students came up with a methodology for tracking folks using lovely technology, but also hooking up their systems to the area emergency rooms and being able to say, if that person came in, don't refer them back, but send them back to us. Over a year and a half, about 18 months, because now the students are getting ready to graduate, about 18 months, we realized that we had saved the District of Columbia government over $2.5 million. Well, that's a pretty good ROI on a $100,000 investment. So thinking about how do you reach out to professors, to universities. The other thing about innovation is that we have to make sure that it's not so tightly held. How many people have heard of the Honeybee Network? Whoa, one person. That's the innovator. No, I'm just kidding. Just type it in, Honeybee Network. Created out of India by a bunch of students who said, we have so many complex social problems, but we know that the people living in those communities have the solutions. And so they literally created an open source database where you can go, I did it the other day, type in education, you get all these things that recommend how education has changed. And while it was created in India, it's now taken on, and there's other countries that are represented. And so it lists the intervention or solution, it lists the country, but most importantly, it lists the person that created that change. And not because they want to give him kudos, but so that you can actually reach out and say, tell me how that worked. Right? The collaboration, oftentimes we say, oh, well, how do we share students? How do we share clients? But very rarely talk about how do we share intellectual capital. And that was huge. A resource I have not invested, no stock whatsoever, but the Stanford Social Innovation Review. I'm not a big fan usually of just like one publication. But what I do like is the online version because the dialogue and discourse, if you keep clicking page down, that's where the good stuff is. Because you'll have one academic say one thing, and then you all be like, that's just some BS. When was the last time you stepped off Stanford's campus? Let me tell you how it really is. And so the opportunity for dialogue and discourse, nowhere on these slides did I say innovation was neat. Nowhere did I say it was kind. It's respectful, but it's not always kind. It requires dialogue and discourse, like our dining room table. Dialogue and discourse. But most importantly, it requires honesty. And that's what you will find there. The solution economy, again, I don't know these guys. I met them once. What I like about it is that it gives examples. That I remember running my not-for-profit, both when I was working with young people and specifically when I was working with the criminal justice system, there was a lack of time. There was a lack of space to just know what people are doing. And I will say what they have done well is to be able to capture some really great examples, particularly public-private partnerships. And just because I'm a data geek, I love brain picking, just random stuff in the middle of the day. Because what I found is that it is not that I go to a reentry conference, and Lord knows it's not that I go to another mentoring conference right now, or that I'm sitting in yet another meeting in the Roosevelt room about my brother's keeper that actually intellectually stimulates me. It is when I step outside my box of what I'm required to do and begin to think, what do other people do? When I was growing up on Lincoln, I was like, I wonder how the other half lives. What do other people do? How are other problems solved? What is happening in the medical community? What is happening in the housing community? What is happening in the financial community that actually can be relevant to what I'm going through now? So being able to think, and that's brain pickers, who send you some random stuff. They'll send you some funny stuff, some hard stuff, but the idea of how do we recognize that we do not exist in a silo, but that we have a set of interdependencies that requires us to oftentimes think outside our box and more than likely go talk to people that we don't know. I don't know who was on my bus this morning, so don't take this personally, but I noticed I got on the van. I'm not the smallest person in the world, so I was like, let me not go all the way to the back third row. So I sat in the front seat. And I sat in the front seat and I just listened. I couldn't see. And for like the first 5 minutes while we were waiting to take off, nobody said anything. Everybody was on their phone. I looked back, ooh, don't catch me looking at you. And then all of a sudden, somebody got on the bus and said, hey, good morning. And I was like, oh, good morning. It is that little difference that changed the course of our bus ride. People put their phones away. They talked about they've been to farmer's table yet. I went, it's the bomb. They talked about where you're from. It takes one little thing to break the ice. This is not about a monumental shift in life. I don't have time for monumental shifts with 6 kids. It is about the incremental moments that I choose to do something differently or to make a difference that ultimately results in change. When I think about organizations like Delancey Street, does anybody know about Delancey Street? Anybody from the West Coast out here? Oh, God, how far did you travel? God bless you. Oh, if you didn't hear, she said she was from Los Angeles. I was about to give her kudos for traveling all the way across the country. I live here now. She went from one warm climate to another. Did anybody actually travel in the crazy system? Where'd you come from? Where? No, not you. Although some would argue that's a whole different country than Boca. Let me just say, I was like, whoa. Okay, sorry. Yes, where are you from, ma'am? Okay, you live there now? All right. Woo. See. Be careful. She's going to try to recruit you to move here. She goes, hey, it's warm. There's palm trees. Come on down. The issue is that oftentimes we have figured out in our minds that something is either too far, too long, too much, I'm too tired. And there's things like the plane, modern technology, right, that has shifted something that used to, I guess, take days. I don't know. I can't imagine. When I'm on Virgin America going to San Francisco, it feels like days when you got kids screaming, but you can get there in 4.5 hours or 5, so they say. But the fact that there are things that we now take for granted, how do we have that ability? Because I would love to take something for granted in the social sector. I would love to take for granted that my oldest son, who is now 23 years old, who was autistic, could walk down the street in Bethesda and not get arrested. I would love to take that for granted. I would love to take for granted that my twin 7-year-old girl do not have a 1 in 10 chance of being raped. I would love to take that for granted. Would love that. I would love to take for granted that if we do this pledge for Father's Day, the 16 million young people who will not have a mentor will have a mentor. But I can't. And it's amazing to me, and I don't have the answer, so maybe you do, but it's amazing to me that for those of us, for you, who have chosen to take up some of the hardest things in the world to solve, that we have not given ourselves the privilege and the opportunity to say, one day I want to take this for granted. That is what you get when you think about change. Not that, well, it's going to be a better day tomorrow, or it's going to be a better day the next day, but how will one day I no longer need to exist? When I started my not-for-profit, I was pretty clear. If we're still doing this in 10 years, we have failed. And people said, well, what kind of madness? What are you going to do after that? And I said, I don't know, but I'll figure something out. But I used to work, and I don't say this necessarily to brag. I say it to say this was the level that the problem had reached. When I was running my youth program, we ended up partnering with Jane Fonda to do this campaign to reduce teenage pregnancy prevention. Needless to say, the campaign is still going. But I remember being in D.C., and we hosted a meeting downtown, and we had a new mayor, Mayor Sharon Pratt Kelly, Marion Barry. They just transitioned out for whatever reason. And Mayor Kelly came in, first woman, and she said, well, let me get all the groups together and see what resources we have in the community. She wanted to do a little bricolage. What resources we have to really make a difference. And we were so proud. We're going to meet the mayor. How exciting. And our staff, we all got dressed up because I must say, when the document said casual, you are so lucky that my family said don't go there. Because casual to me is like shorts and a T-shirt. It's my like Iron Man T-shirt from Target and my Adidas sneakers that my kids got me. So I'm so glad that I didn't take that notice literally that Leon said it's casual. It's like, But anyway, needless to say, we got dressed up because we wore jeans and T-shirts every day. We went to the mayor's office. We walked in. We go through security. And we're like, okay, so this was all the group. This is a teenage pregnancy prevention meeting. I would say the meeting room was probably like from here over, okay, in the council building. We walk in. There are more people in there than you all right here. And we were standing at the door, and I started to cry. And they said, what's the matter? I said, this is a damn shame. We are failing our girls and our boys. If every single one of us in this room is spending more than 25% of our day focused on teenage pregnancy, we are clearly doing something wrong. Because we should not all be here. And people were like, well, where are you going? And then afterwards, my board said, well, I can't believe you left. I was embarrassed. They were like, what do you mean? I said, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that there were over 1,000 people in that room saying they're solving teenage pregnancy. Some of them I've known, been around for 20, 25 years in D.C., and we haven't moved the needle a bit. And they said, well, Melissa, it takes time. I was like, well, how much time do we have? My mom was 85. She's like, if you don't hurry up and do something significant, I'm going to be upset with you. We don't have that kind of time. And so the reality here is that the innovation for me, the greatest innovation in the social sector is going to be the sense of urgency, the sense of survival, that which our clients, our stakeholders, our partners live with every single day. My students come and say, I want to go not-for-profit sector. I go, why? Why do you want to do it? I sat next to this guy on the plane yesterday. He said, are you in the government? I was like, I said, what do you do? He said, I'm in the government. I said, that's great. I said, because you look like you're in the private sector. All dressed up, nice suit, had on his Prada shoes. He said, I used to be a lawyer, and I felt like I needed to make a difference. And I go, oh, God, what agency do you work for? And he said, I'm in the General Counsel's Office of the State Department. I was like, oh. I said, you want to talk about Benghazi? He said, no. I said, okay, great. He said, but I got talking points for you. I said, I know you do. And I said, well, tell me why you did. And he pulled up his computer. Beautiful family. And I said, so why? He said, well, I had made all this money. And I felt like it was time for me to give back because my kids were looking at me saying, what are you doing, Dad? And all I could say was making billable hours. And I said to him, I said, well, that's noble. That's noble. I said, do you enjoy what you do? He said, no, not really. I said, you're going to make it to 2016? Probably not. I said, then why do you do it? He said, because it makes me feel good. And I said, well, how about I gave you a different proposition? So, we were late. Somebody got sick on the plane. Well, you were on my flight with the guy. I just think he wanted to move up to first class, but whatever. He got to sit in the front seat. Anyway, and I said, well, clearly we got some time. I think we were like 20, 30 minutes late. And so I said, well, let me flip the script for a minute. What if you were able to change your body of work at a law firm and not just do the pro bono stuff 10% of the time, but figure out how it could actually be integrated into the business model? And we just started brainstorming. And he was like, oh my God, how do I get that job? And I said, you make it yourself. And I would say the other innovative piece about social sector is that it ain't just about us. There is not a single organization that is successful without a lawyer, without a capitalist, without the client, without a parent. To have the naivete, and also one would say the ignorance, to think that we are the only ones that can solve the problem is a misnomer. And so the opportunity to say, this is our problem. How do we fix it? Nothing personal, but I don't think everybody's taken a vow of poverty. Particularly if you haven't been with the nuns, it doesn't work out well. Lots of pent-up aggression. But oftentimes we use that which we are trying to solve, race, class, gender, to continue to marginalize those that could actually be helpful to us in solving the problem. We recreate the challenges, the systemic isms in the work that we do, as opposed to role modeling to be something different. And that's a huge challenge. So the innovations that I hope for are that ultimately we all go out of business. And whatever conference this is next, it's just a big old party. Joe can manage that very well. Just make it a big old party, take off your shoes, and go for it. The other innovation is that we stop thinking that we're better than, and we reach across and say we all can. I don't know how many people are sports fans. Anybody a sports fan? I know those Hoyas are, although we ain't won a championship in I don't know how long. I'm a sports fan. I don't really get to watch it much. I have to share the television with like Dora, Tommy the Train. I was like, trains don't talk. Anyway, needless to say, the moments I can get adult television, and I'm not fighting against Scandal and Big Bang Theory, I watch the games. And what's fascinating to me, and I love MSNBC and CNBC, and I even watch Fox, is I like to know what's happening across the world. I live in Bethesda. We're the only black people. We're the only gay people. My wife is Jewish, so we blend in that way. I always say we're not an innovation, we're just a novelty. But what's interesting to me is the LA Clippers, right? The issue is not that the guy said something, because let's be clear, he's been saying that for years. I mean, how many millions of dollars he's been sued? I was like, how does that not make the story? But what's interesting is not how we reacted or how the folks reacted to one person bringing them down or shifting people's perspective, but how folks rallied. And that almost every single team in the NBA changed their websites, and they all said, we are one. That the teams, let's be clear, I'm talking in thousands, these brothers talking in millions, were willing to boycott the playoff games and recognize the ripple effect of their salaries, their penalties, the money to their teams, the potential loss of sponsor deals, if this was not resolved with a lifetime ban. That happened in 24 hours. That happened because the phones were ringing, the emails were going, the Twitters were happening. That happened because people were able to focus on a common solution. Now, unfortunately, the Clippers lost yesterday because that would have been an even better ending, but we'll see. But the point there is not about the technology, right? The point there is not whose Facebook page or whose URL. The point there is there was a single focus. And I will say that the greatest challenge of our sector, and sometimes holding innovation back, is that we think we are the single cog in the wheel. What do? I solve homelessness. What do? I solve reentry. What do? I solve illiteracy. At the end of the day, we all solve for humankind. If this table got together and picked a community, I guarantee you could solve all the problems in 18 months or less. This is a sector where we walk around, and I'm part of it, with great pride in our accomplishments. We look for awards and accolades, because those are pretty nice, by the way. But we never are given the opportunity to collaborate beyond a specific outcome, but to collaborate for a greater vision. So I say to all of you who are doing this work, I threw my script to the wind. I don't know what the heck I was really going to talk about. But as I've met the very few people who are willing to acknowledge they know Joe Sibilia, I am humbled by the power that is in this room. It is not about what I'm going to say or what I've said. It's not about what anybody else is going to say. It's about what are you going to do differently while you're here, but most importantly, what are you going to do differently when you leave here? This is lovely. I'm so excited about the golf thing tonight. I'm thinking I'm going to sneak out of dinner and actually try to play. If I get a bright orange ball, I might be able to find it. Because it don't matter day or night, I still don't shoot well. But what happens is that innovation is not about a moment in time. It is about a continual process to think differently. The only thing that sets me apart from you is that I'm crazy. I got 6 kids. My wife wants more. I'm always fighting. No, thank God we're gay because we can't have any more right away. Because Lord knows we'd have like the Walton family times 10. But the difference is that now at the age of 46, I value time. I'm not going to solve reentry or solve the mentoring problem because that's been existing for the past 20, 30 years. But what I need to do is take the time to figure out how does that change for the next 20 to 30 years. The privilege that we have all been given to be here today, thanks to Mary and the board and the sponsors, is tremendous. Do not view this as a pat on the back for what you do. View this as the raising the bar for what needs to be done. As I'm going to pay attention to Leon, as I close, all I can say to you is, I'm from Orange, New Jersey, single-parent home, hated going to school, hated the parochial clothes that everybody made fun of and wearing the Walmart shoes. That if I can figure out how to go from the Big Brothers, Big Sister, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, to a private school, to a degree, to a graduate degree, to manage millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, to now serve our country. When you go back and you look in the eyes of the people that you are serving, do not think, I'm going to help you, but think about, how can you help me? Because people along the way say, you're not going to make it. You're never going to get into school. You're not going to go anywhere, because that was the statistics around me. Statistics are great if they drive an intervention. Statistics should never be the limit of where someone can go. The innovation is allowing statistics and information to drive where you really want to be. Thank you.